Welcome to Caligula's Council, where the autism virus is spreading because we're doing another anime episode. I'm Count Nothing Face.
And I'm one irradiated Watson.
And like I said earlier, we're talking about anime again. This is an episode on Parasyte. For those of you who watch Adult Swim or are into anime, that might be familiar to you. Parasyte was an anime, or is an anime rather, that was based on a manga that came out in the 80s or 90s, I don't remember when, I don't have the page up right now because I'm not prepared. It is a story of a teenage boy whose arm is infested with a parasite that basically takes control of his arm in a failed attempt to take control of his brain. There are other parasites in this universe that have infected humanity and have seized control of their brains and have taken control of their bodies and have proceeded to devour all of humanity. And now the protagonist...
One sec. Shinichi?
Shinichi, yes. So Shinichi has developed a symbiotic relationship with the parasite that has infected his right arm, who he has dubbed Migi. This is the Japanese word for right, or is derived from the Japanese word for right. And so it's like the equivalent of calling your right arm righty. So the two of them develop a very symbiotic relationship in which they basically they each help the other. Like the parasite, Migi feeds off of the nutrients in Shinichi's bloodstream, while Migi also protects Shinichi from danger.
And so it was started in 88 and the manga ended in 95. So that gives you a little kind of dating. It's a very much an older one.
Yeah, I actually heard something that Studio Ghibli actually wanted to do an adaptation way back when the manga was released. Like Miyazaki, I think, actually showed interest in actually doing an adaptation of Parasyte, which is interesting considering the subject matter. I mean, like, Miyazaki's material is pretty dark, but it's not quite this dark.
Yeah, I would think that sometimes artists or directors get interested in doing something a little different, but I think this might have been something that might have been dangerous for Miyazaki just because if his name was plastered all over it, it might have cracked the wrong crowd and given him a bad name. But yeah,
maybe it is bizarre. It is a bizarre, like, for those of you who haven't watched it, like, the Parasyte is probably one of the most bizarre animes I've ever watched in my life, and it's not really, it's more of an anime that sort of grew on me more so than one that I actively. So it was different in the sense that, so I've like, you can find anime that engrosses you, like Attack on Titan or Sword Art Online and stuff like that kind of thing. It immerses you and you get drawn into the world by how wonderful and surreal it is. Parasyte's similar, but it actually it's weird. It is such a weird anime, but like I couldn't help but keep watching.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched it, I kind of had it pegged as sort of the recent trend of incredibly bloody and gruesome, just dark animes. And while it certainly has some of that, I don't think that was what it was going for. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the manga being so old, it really, that was part of the plot, and it wasn't gratuitous. It made sense in the plot.
Right. And
the plot wasn't just written to incorporate that in it. The main theme to it is what I like to call autism, but the plot calls kind of being a monster or being less than human.
Right.
And it kind of stems from the main character at one point becomes injured and becomes even more enmeshed with the parasite, even more symbiotic, because it heals what used to be his heart. Right. After it gets ripped out. So yeah. Afterwards, his personality starts to change, and whereas before you had a human and an autistic arm, mm-hmm. He starts to become more autistic, and the parasite starts to become a little more human. Although he becomes definitely more autistic than the parasite becomes human. And he keeps being kind of scared of himself because he doesn't react with emotions. But it's not, I don't know, I guess being nearer to that spectrum, it's like I get it. Like I get the feeling of like not reacting emotionally, having the appropriate emotions in the situation. Like, it's totally normal to me.
Right. Well, so to clarify, like when we talk about autism here, like we're talking about basically egoism, because the parasite Migi is like, so when you learn about the parasites and you learn about the parasites that have come to Earth, you realize that they're mostly just they're all about self-preservation, as all parasites are. And so their interactions with each other are essentially autistic. Like, they care about their own self-interest, and they have no problem killing their own kind. So when we say that that Migi, the parasite, is autistic, like, that's what we mean, is that, he cares about himself, and he doesn't view emotion as rational.
Not only does he not view emotion rational, and it's sort of an exaggeration of autism, but he doesn't have any social element to him. There's no need for the social. It's all pure gene Darwinism. I need to survive and do what I need to do to reproduce and live. Right. And I don't think there aren't many creatures or complex creatures which operate on those sort of specifications, which is why making the creature a parasite makes sense, because you're giving a very simple creature with very simple needs a complex brain and seeing how it would react to the world.
Right.
Being adapted to just screw, eat, and survive.
Right. Yeah. It's it is interesting to kind of see that idea of a parasite, like a parasitic life kind of personified, because it really does, it makes sense, because like the interactions that Shinichi has with Migi are all like, a human versus like an autistic parasite and stuff. But anyway, so that's the basic premise. Like, you have a guy, so you basically have, like, the goal of the parasites that come to Earth are to take control of the heads of humans so that they have full control of the body. But this is a story of a parasite that fails and ends up having to work together with its host in order to survive and to preserve its interests. And as the story progresses, like the interests of the parasite and the interests of the human sort of slowly begin to coalesce and become one, and they become like a sort of team, and they actually develop something of a friendship by the end of the show.
Right. Whereas in the beginning of the show, the parasite's just like, if you don't do what I say, I'll kill you.
Right.
And, it basically, it uses pure threats to get Shinichi to cooperate.
Right. Well, he doesn't necessarily threaten Shinichi all the time. He does threaten his family, though.
Right.
Because if he were to kill Shinichi, then he would die. So.
But he does threaten him with death sometimes. Like, there are some things that are.
Occasionally, yeah, he does.
Yeah.
But he also like. So yeah, it is mostly threats that he uses to. To advance his interests. But as time goes on, those Migi and Shinichi's interests begin to coincide.
Right. I think one of the big fears of the parasite is being discovered.
Right.
Because if Shinichi lets on to the existence of parasites, not only will Shinichi be threatened, but then the parasite their host will be known and, might be locked up or stowed away.
Right.
And this egoist parasite kind of develops an interest in learning for learning's sake, in the sense that it finds learning to be self-interest, in its self-interest, because then it can know more about the world and know more about how to preserve itself.
Right, exactly. So you'll see moments where, in conversation with Migi, Shinichi will be talking to Migi, and Migi will be reading a book or looking something up on the internet and just learning for the sake of learning at a certain point.
Right. I mean, I think the most memorable moment probably is just awkward when Migi tries to force Shinichi into a situation. Shinichi was like, "Why did you do that?" And then Migi was like, I want to observe human mating rituals.
Oh yeah, he I forget exactly what he does, but he doesn't he try to grope a girl or something like that? I don't know.
Something like that.
Yeah. So like it's like but it's like to Migi, like sex is just a biological process, and
which
sort of
which kind of gets into one of the antagonists, Reiko Tamura.
Right, I was just about to bring her up. So there is another parasite that is taking control of who's now like taking control of another of one of Shinichi's teachers, and this one has successfully taken control of her brain, and so now she is like teaching the students math and stuff like that. And there is a moment where, and this is probably one of the more disturbing aspects of the anime, because she gets together with another parasite that is taking control of a human host, and they have sex, and they have a human baby, and she raises the human baby, and she like kind of makes like offhand remarks, is like, I haven't done anything to the baby yet, or I haven't, because it's mostly like the idea is like it's just an experiment. Is like
right. She didn't even know how. None of them know how these parasites would even reproduce.
Right.
And actually, that's never known in the show. It's never clear how they came about or how they would reproduce at all. Mm-hmm. So this was all an experiment to see how they would reproduce, and then what am I going to do with this human baby? And it's just all an experiment for her.
Right.
And there's this really creepy moment where she kidnaps this old lady to take care of the baby, and the baby starts crying, and she does something like some sort of like dog command, and then the baby stops crying like she trained it like a dog. And it's at that point that you realize that even though she's the mother, she has no mothering instincts at all.
Right. And that's what's so disturbing about it, is like, it's her biological offspring technically, but it was created by something that wants to eat humans. And in many ways, like, this is probably like one of the most creative body horror shows I've seen in a long time, because like, you're a monster giving birth to a human being. Mm-hmm. That's horrifying to think about, like that, and the idea that it can raise something but not know how to properly raise it. Like, that plays on all of our fears about bad parents or psychopathic parents.
Right. I mean, I think that this character Reiko fully qualifies as psychopathic in the human sense. Not that that's against her nature. That's very much in her nature to be psychopathic, just because she isn't human. But she fully qualifies as psychopathic in the human sense because she has zero concern for anyone but herself, and is actively destructive to other people, mm-hmm. For her own interests.
Right. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up Reiko, because that because like one of the thing, like, so everyone at home, you're probably asking, like, why are we talking about this anime? Like, what is so reactionary about it? And the thing about the thing is, like, this show is not reactionary per se, but I think that it touches on some interesting themes. Like, in particular, you have the question of how do we find meaning in our lives, and also like the questions of universalism versus particularism, and what is humanity's place on Earth, which are fundamental questions to life in general, and they're very much unique to humanity. Most animals don't ask questions about, like no animal that I'm aware of asks questions like this. And
yeah, I think there's something about the way this show is presented, and it seems to come out of an earlier Japanese tradition, which is descended from World War II, which is the kind of pacifist with a C stream, where there are many characters who were against using violence or reacted poorly to using violence because they were cultured to see violence as horrible, right, in the way they were raised. And it's an older universalism, one that would probably harken back to the Cold War leftism, not the new leftism we see today. And it's interesting to see Cold War era peaceniks, as it were, being put in situations of life or death where they have to learn and adapt. And Shinichi doesn't really do so well. And without Migi there, he probably would have never made it through.
Yeah, it is really interesting when you look at Shinichi's development, like as it becomes less human, quote unquote. But really, when we say less human, we really mean more autistic. when he said, because that's one of the big that's one of the big disconnects is like, really when all the struggles he has about being human are really just him becoming more autistic. But it's interesting to see that because, like he does try to adopt a universalist ethic in a way, or he isn't so concerned about self-preservation. He is much more other regarding than Migi is. And, eventually they kind of have to find a balance between the two. Like, do we balance our self-interest, or do we when is it appropriate to be self-interested, and when is it appropriate to be other regarding?
Yeah, he's one of those characters, that Shinichi, that I just want to punch in the face repeatedly until he's bloody, and it wouldn't really matter because he would recover anyways.
Right.
But his level of pacifism. No, pacifism, as in like peace. Pacifism with the C.
His peacenikness.
His peacenikness is just, it reminds me so much of all those people who you would read about, who were just like, who would just stare in the face of something that was really a dire threat and, let the refugee in the door, or the terrorist down the block, or invite some, rowdy third world teenager into your home to it's exactly that kind of sentiment. And while maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration, maybe Shinichi has a little bit more sense than that, it still is that same strain of sort of wild idealism which still lives on today.
See, I actually, as time goes on, though, in the anime, he becomes more particularist, though. So, like, one of the big themes in it is, like, a sort of universalism versus particularism question. How... And Reiko, the substitute teacher who raises the human baby, kind of raises this question a lot too, when she's like learning about herself as a parasite and learning about, what can we do, what is there to, what are our limits, what is it that we can and can't do. And she actually says to Shinichi later in the series, like, we are fragile creatures, please don't bully us. And Shinichi is just pissed because it's like, no, you guys are abominations. I should bully you. You deserve it because you guys are monsters. So he recognizes the threat. So I don't know if I'm fully on board with the fact that he's a total peacenik. At least in the later in the series, he sort of like starts developing a sort of us versus them mentality.
Well, that's after he becomes more autistic, one.
Right.
And two, after his mother gets killed and his father gets threatened.
So after his mother gets killed and and Migi has to and he gets like his heart cut out and Migi has to heal him and he starts becoming more autistic. That's when he becomes a much more of a particularist, which actually could serve as sort of a point against him.
Right. His character never really changes. It's only when the chemistry in his brain and his body, his biology physically changes that he grows as a character.
Yeah.
Which is why I kind of never let him off the hook, because it wasn't really him. It was him version 2.0, which changed.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's a good point.
I mean, he sits there and basically lets a thing that looks like his mother stab him in the heart. And while I could never imagine being in that sort of situation, to look at something that appears to be like your mother, but is fully a monster, like, at the same time, when the moment comes, he doesn't rise. He just lets it happen.
He lets him, like, he basically would rather choose to die than face something that is going to kill him.
Something that's a facsimile, a simulation of his mother.
Right. So like a parasite has basically killed his mother, taking control of her body and assumes her form.
Mm-hmm.
And he just doesn't do anything about it. And Migi even tells him, like, what are you doing? Like, let me kill her. It's not your mom. So yeah, you're right. Like, it isn't until, like, Migi takes more control over Shinichi that he starts to actually become more of starts developing a particularist sense of good versus evil, us versus them.
And I think it is literally, like, if we were to be autistic about this, he did have a broken amygdala. He wasn't really able to properly analyze the threats to his own life or to his own family. And it was only when that self-preservation instinct was literally injected into his brain chemistry that he was able to function in this dangerous world.
Yeah, it's definitely no, that's definitely true. Yeah, no, that's I can't really disagree with you there.
Yeah, but I think one of the to kind of get to the nitty gritty details about the universalism versus particularism, he does kind of have an aversion early on to killing the parasites because it's sort of this like all life is precious, and then he kind of evolves into they're monsters and need to die phase. I'm going to kill them all. And the only reason that Migi pushes back is because Migi doesn't want to put herself in unnecessary danger. It doesn't serve Migi's purpose to kill competitors unless they're directly threatening to her.
Right.
But there's kind of at the end, there's kind of this weird universalism which comes over Shinichi when he realizes what Reiko was saying when she said we're fragile creatures, which is because the parasites aren't social creatures, while they can cooperate in a self-interested manner, they can't cooperate in a selfless manner. Mm-hmm. And that makes humans so much more powerful than them. And what you see is as soon as humans figure out there's a threat and they start cooperating, even though these creatures are individually very, very, very dangerous and they can slaughter humans probably by the dozens with ease, they get wiped out. They start to be wiped out very fast because humans can cooperate, and even if a number of them can get killed, if they can throw the numbers and cooperate to kill them, they are very fragile. Mm. So you get this sort of, I almost want to say, no, I'm not going to go there, but you just get this moment where Shinichi realizes we could wipe them out in a second. If we tried, it would be costly, but we would come out the other side just fine. And that's where he kind of realizes, well, do these dangerous creatures have a right to live? And he sort of wavers, and that's after Reiko dies. And in the end, Reiko, whether she does or doesn't, shows some humanity in protecting her child, which for whatever reason she decides is important to protect. Right. And that's sort of what. But again, it's almost as if, a kind of census act of one parasite kind of just wipes his opinion of all parasites, when I don't think any of the rest of them would ever have done something like that, or even capable of it.
Right.
So, again, I think the only rational response from a human perspective, from something that's a social creature, which is seeing its kind slaughtered day by day by predators. That's what the parasites are. They're predators. Yeah. The only rational response is to hunt them down and make sure they're wiped off the face of the earth.
Right, exactly. Like that's what's weird about this anime, right? Like it's basically kind of taking the universalist perspective to things that want to kill you, which kind of similar to what you're seeing in Europe. We're basically saying like, oh yeah, it's fine, we'll let them in, even though they're raping and killing us. Like, we'll let these refugees in, even though they're a threat to our well-being and they're a threat to us. And you kind of start to see that when you get into what's interesting is about Parasyte is that it actually does kind of make that position seem like if I were to summarize it, there are parts of the show where people are questioning the ethics of completely annihilating a parasitic species that devours people's brains and slices people up simply for sport. You would think I was insane. Like, how could you possibly consider that a worthwhile moral question? The answer is obvious. You kill them. That was one of the most... But what's weird is that Parasyte actually, for me at least, it actually did kind of work in that sense. I ultimately, the answer is still obvious. You do kill these things. I'm not saying that I was like, oh yeah, the parasites are okay. It wasn't like that. It was more like, but it's still kind of like, it still presented it in a way that like you could plausibly see someone believing these things.
Right, and certainly at the end, I think, if anything, it made you feel sympathetic in the sense that, wipe them off, burn them in the ovens, but, you might feel a little bad about them, might throw them a little funeral, might have a sad trumpet play at the end.
Here lies blade fucking death parasite that tried to kill me today.
Yeah, if anything, there's something you can respect. An enemy you can respect,
Right.
I think that where the analogy kind of falls off, and I don't think it was an analogy for refugees. I just think it was an analogy. It was just a universalist philosophy being played out in science fiction. But where the analogy would fall off with refugees is that the refugees are not fragile. They can reproduce, unlike the parasites.
Yeah. Well, right.
And they represent an ongoing threat rather than a temporary one.
Right. Yeah. No, I'm just trying to like make the analogy to like the universalist tendency.
Absolutely.
I think that one of the things that I think absolutely captures the universalist tendency that Parasyte is the sort of universalism that you see with the environmentalist, because there are certain strands of environmentalism, particularly like the voluntary human extinction movement and stuff like that, that view humans as the biggest problem with the biggest problem with the environment is humanity, is what you see in a lot of environmentalist circles.
Right, and I think that Reiko and who was the main antagonist? What was his name?
What was it? Gotuo, I think, or Gotu. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, Gotou, Goto, maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah, both of them, Reiko, they played on sort of the environmentalist themes. They didn't use environmentalism, but they played on, we're just creatures, we're animals too, we have a right to exist on this planet. Who says you are the ultimate ethical beings?
And what right do you have to say that?
Right.
Yeah.
Especially since they're sentient.
Right. Yeah. So so that even raises an interesting question. Like, is intelligence even the measure that we should use? Is that the metric that we should use to measure the worth of a life form?
I say absolutely not. And I think that comes back on humanity, which, humans seem to measure, among many other things, one of the important things that humans measure life is the ability to cooperate, right?
Right.
So for an antisocial, psychopathic creature, if it can't cooperate, of what value is it to you?
Right.
If it can never cooperate, then it could never be of any value whatsoever. And that's sort of I think it's a very human way of looking at it, is that, mammals tend to be can sometimes cooperate. They're warm and fuzzy. Even the most dangerous of them can be trained to a certain extent. There'll always be some that'll be always dangerous to some extent, but, they have some sort of cooperative instinct. At the very least, they appreciate their family. They have the concept of family. And humans tend to value things which cooperate with them and value them, even if it's just for warmth and food. Mm-hmm. And when something doesn't display any of those tendencies, burn it with fire. I think that's what Starship Troopers was getting at, is that it doesn't matter that the bugs are smart. They're still bugs,
Right, yeah. And it doesn't matter that the parasites are smart. It doesn't matter that they there is one instance of like Shinichi and Migi having a symbiotic relationship. Like, sure, that is the exception to the rule. Like, that is an edge case. But, what you see among the left is like everything is an edge case, and every edge case disproves the rule.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, but like there was actually there was one part of the show. So Gotuo, or whatever, how you pronounce his name, is a parasite that is basically 5 parasites on one body, and Gotuo is the head. Mm-hmm. It basically coordinates with all the other parasites. But what was interesting though is that, like, there was one scene where he's in a building, and they get the SWAT team in to try to kill this parasite and so like we haven't gone over the parasite's powers, but basically what they have, the ability to like morph their appearance into the form of like blades and tentacles, and they can morph around and like basically like think of T-1000, I think, from Terminator 2, but with a more of a Cronenberg look, with like multiple eyes and like tentacles and blades, and like you've basically got the parasites in general.
And basically, unless the host gets shot through the heart or like has some sort of major blood loss, the things are basically invisible.
Yeah, they're
invincible.
they're invincible unless their unless their host's vital organs are damaged, then they're pretty much unstoppable. And so like this guy has like 5 parasites on one body, so he is virtually invincible. But there's a scene where the SWAT team is trying to find him in this building, and they encounter this guy who's like this environmentalist he's not the one who's been running for mayor, but I forget what his role was in this scheme that the Parasytes had, where they were running for mayor, or like running for office and trying to influence environmental policies.
Right. They're basically hijacking environmental movements and running for office, and they did get elected to office. So basically, the mayor at one point is a parasite, and it's kind of terrifying to see, again, psychopathic predatory creatures, hijacking politics for their own powers, and they basically use their powers to, basically create feeding grounds for themselves where they can, feed with impunity, and the police will look the other way. Not that the police know or anything; they're looking the other way because of power.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how like the parasites kind of engage in passivism with the S in a way.
They do.
Because there's like certain parasites that just go all out and start killing everybody, and then they get killed by the police. But then the ones that operate in secret and the ones that infiltrate the government agencies, they're the ones that actually are the biggest threats.
Right, and it's interesting. They're not trying to like win the country. They're just trying to engage in enough local politics that they can create their own safe space, as it were, to feed.
Right.
So it's kind of it's a very different goal than getting political power. It's more.
It's not for its own sake. It's only to get away. It's only to just basically have a space for them to devour other people.
And it's reasonable. I mean, I can definitely see corrupt politicians creating a space for mobsters, and it's very much a similar thing.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's something that happens in real life, whereas, like, them becoming the president of the country and having the parasite party, that's very much unreasonable and unrealistic. But local mob, corrupt politicians, that's something that happens all the time.
Yeah, and the movement the platform that they run on makes sense. They run on an environmentalist platform, which is all about, universalizing life beyond human life. But back to that, like there was a human character who was part of their campaign, whose goal was basically to cull the human population for environmentalist purposes, and it reminded me of the voluntary human extinction movement. It reminded me of a lot of things about about environmentalism, about how like humans are the problem, and if we reduce human population, then not all environmentalists believe this, but to be fair, they don't all believe this, but there are certain strains of environmentalists who think that humans are the problem, and that we need to reduce the entire human population in order to reduce pollution and protect the environment for all non-human animals and for the earth.
And just as a side note, I think a lot of those movements, could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please tell me I am. I would like to know that I'm wrong. A lot of them seem to lose steam as soon as they try to universalize outside of Western populations. Because while there are plenty of people who seem very much willing to suicide the West, I don't think there are a lot of people who feel or are willing to sort of reinstate colonialism in order to create mass genocide of outsiders. And that's where I think that a lot of those environmental movements kind of lose their coherence, is when they start to try and operate outside of Western culture.
Yeah, I think that what basically they don't tend to operate outside of Western culture. I think the reason for that is because they look at pollution, and like Western culture does most of the polluting, next to China, of course.
Of course, but I mean, are they really attacking China?
Well, they are, but not as much as they're attacking the West.
Right, and I think much of environmentalism is just Marxism with a funny hat.
Well, right, yeah, for a lot of environmentalism is really just an excuse for communism.
Right,
because you can do that. Like you can have an environment, like you can conserve nature and you can do things that, you can take measures to protect the environment for future generations and for future use. And, you can be a conservationist. You don't have to be a communist, but it just so happens that many environmentalists use it as an excuse for communism, right. Because they see the capitalist industrialism polluting the world and they say, oh, if we had, you know what I mean. But
yeah, no, I know. I think you can get really Alex Jonesy with it, and there certainly are UN resolutions which are very scary at face value. But I think it really is just sort of the conspiracy without a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm,
People are incentivized to create these environmental regulations, and they're incentivized to escalate and signal and gain more power for local bureaucrats and world bureaucrats.
Right.
And of course, the world bureaucratic class would like to have control over the world economies and world development and world communities. Now, someone may or may not hand in that power. I don't think it's likely. It's possible. But why wouldn't they try and create resolutions which have the potential to hand over that power? Because they can fail a million times. They only need to win once, and it's over.
Right. Yeah. But, and like those institutions, like the Parasytes in the show, use environmentalism as a means of advancing their own interests about their own survival.
Mm-hmm.
So much. I'm kind of like internally debating like how sincere a lot of the Parasytes are about their motivations. I guess they're not. Yeah, I guess it's fair to say that they're not sincere about the environmentalist concerns. But
I'll ask you a question. How sincere are, mestizo immigrants about their democratic ambitions?
Not at all. Sincere. Yeah, no, that's true. Well, I don't know. Like there are scenes like where you meet like certain Parasytes that seem the human that they recruit to be a part of their movement. He's sincere.
Of course
he's a true believer. Okay, so but he's not. But they're not. The Parasytes aren't interested in that, in preserving environment.
Of course, and it reminds me of very much of both Soviet culture and Chinese culture and Russian culture, post-Soviet Russian culture, I mean,
mm-hmm.
where they'll use Western norms and poke fun at the West because they know they can. They'd be like, hey, remember when you killed that black person? Remember when that cop shot him? Hey, you're bad people. Yeah. And it's like, of course, it's completely hypocritical for them to say. They don't they don't care about that sort of thing.
Right.
They know they can poke the West with it and like say, you're really bad at human rights.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be telling us off. Look at what you did. Look at all the racism you have. And they pull that stuff all the time. Whether it was communist China or post-communist China or communist Russia or post-communist Russia, they know they can poke the West with their own internal contradictions, even when the West is trying its darndest to erase those sort of blights from their society.
Right.
For the worst.
They're playing on the cuckold mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, that one human character is totally cucked because he's
absolutely.
Well, the human character who's like pro-environment and then literally supports the Parasytes and says that we need to call the human population. Well, I guess he's not cucked. He knows exactly what he's doing.
But it's a question like, is it a cucking if you volunteer, right?
I don't think it is. I think if you know exactly what you're doing and you don't care, then you are. Then I don't think it's necessarily cucking. I think you're
beyond that. You
just don't care. Like you really don't. Like recognize that your children aren't your own and you don't care.
And I think that's sort of an element of love is, to love something you have to protect it, you have to cherish it. And I think a huge part of environmentalism is just being apathetic to humanity and having misplaced,
mm-hmm.
misdirected affections or something. It's almost as if
it's sort of misdirected altruism.
Yeah, it's misdirected altruism. I almost put it on the case of, I don't know, like maybe, sodomy or something, It's like something's broken, just as like some people seem to have broken sexual desire, and you can have broken altruism.
Right. No, that makes sense, because you're kind of like looking at, and it's natural too to be sympathetic towards animals, and that's and it's healthy, I think, to have an emotional reaction to an animal being cruelly treated. I think that's a healthy thing because it reflects well on your altruism, but it can go too far.
Right, and it's the same. Similar thing, and maybe I'm overstepping what the science actually says, but it seems to me that environmentalists are utilizing naturalistic, healthy pathways in their emotions in a misdirected way, just in the way as lust does serve a function, but it still can be misdirected, even if lust itself or chemical attraction is a healthy part of human existence.
Right. Yeah. It can be like anything. I mean, like any virtue can become a vice if used in excess. So like altruism can be a virtue, but if you take it to the point where you are harming yourself, or if you are going beyond what is expected of you as what should reasonably be expected of you as a moral agent, then that's when it goes too far. And in the case of lust too, like when you take lust too far, when you're okay with like free love or you have multiple partners, when lust is reserved for one person for the sake of procreating.
Right.
I guess that's not technically lust when you're doing that, but I guess sexuality would be a better word for that instead of lust. But like extending sexuality to more than just sexuality to more than just your romantic partner, that's when it becomes lustful.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I was just reading. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Nicomachean Ethics, and it was just making me think. I just thought, I know there are probably a lot of leftists out there who have read this, who have read Aristotle, or at least excerpts, and it just makes me wonder, like, how do you not parse this? Like,
yeah,
it's and I know, like, you could say that about a million things, literally a million things in the world. So it's not like the one thing like they can't parse, but if you take this thinker seriously, like it's blatantly obvious that he's saying excess of something is a defect.
Right.
And I think that when people think of the mean, even if they're thinking about things in being a mean and being average, they can be controlled if it's the average between two extremes, as in two things that are extremely lopsided already on the scale. And then if everything that's in perspective is lopsided, then what would seem to be the normal reaction, the contextual norm is already screwed up.
So like, are you saying that like when we start developing, so like when you talk about like Aristotle's golden mean, there are two extremes, and the best, like the most virtuous thing is the one that is not excessive and the one that is not deficient. But
right.
Is like when we get into the average, but if we're like talking about averages, then we're talking about like and like we have a culture of degenerate behavior. So overall, right, the mean between the two extremes is actually pretty degenerate if you're looking at it in terms of averages.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I don't think the Aristotelian mean is actually a mean. It's not the midpoint.
No, it's not. It's not technically a mean. Like it's not a literal average of what people do overall.
Right. It's the point where things are balanced, as it were, between excess and deficiency,
right,
like you said, which may not be actually in the midpoint. It may lean one way or the other.
Right. Like, yeah, because if you were to really take the average of, like, I don't know, lust or sexuality in America or in Western culture, you would see the actual average would probably be pretty excessive, even by Aristotelian standards.
Right. And reading through it, it seems it's scary how normal the translation I was reading was, because the ethics he was talking about would not be unfamiliar to any sort of traditional culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, a few adjustments here and there, but it's not that far off.
Right, yeah.
And I'm just, like you said, like, if someone was trying to find what was normal, what the mean was in such a degenerate culture, I think it's where so many people fall wrong, is that they don't take it far enough. You have good people trying honestly to find a mean and trying to be, still at the same time to be socially acceptable and normal, and finding that mean in today's culture is still, like you said, on the degenerate scale. And well-meaning people, they have to be unsociable and abnormal to have to approach anything close to virtue in a lot of situations.
Right. Yeah, it is weird how, well, it's not weird per se that we've just sort of lost sight of virtue in Western culture, and we've like sort of what's interesting about virtue, I think, is that virtue is inherently particularist. Yes, because virtue is mostly a question of, what are the positive qualities of a person's character. So when you get into that question, you're talking about individuals, the individual character of a person, and not what a person does and how a person acts.
Well, I mean, okay. The Nicomachean ethics is very, I'm sorry about the pronunciation, it's very specific that, we measure your virtue by your actions.
Right. No.
And intent matters, of course, but we measure virtue by actions. But what he does say is that context matters. What is virtuous for one person is not necessarily virtuous for another person.
Right, yeah. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Like I'm sort of,
virtue is contextual and particularist,
right?
And it exists on maybe a universal continuum, and there is maybe the end of society comes in a pyramid towards perfection,
right?
But each individual strain has its own ray emanating from perfection, and it's at its own angle, as it were.
Yeah, and right, like that's kind of what I'm sort of, maybe I wasn't articulating very well, was that we have lost the importance of, when we talk about ethics and we talk about morality, we have lost the importance of emphasizing individual character and what that does in terms of like the end of society, or the end of, or the telos or teleo function, however you want to pronounce it. Like there is a telos to humanity.
Right, and
we've sort of misplaced that telos in utilitarianism. We've said that happiness is the telos of humanity, and when I say happiness, I mean hedonism is the telos of humanity, and that's why our priorities about what is good and what is right for society are so warped, and that's why something like Parasyte is so plausible, because it is actually plausible to think about like a kid named Shinichi who is afraid to kill the facsimile of his mother and is afraid to preserve his own life.
Right, and I actually think that I'm actually glad that we've entered a phase of hedonistic utilitarianism, because actual utilitarian, that the widespread philosophical version, the emphasis is not hedonism but suffering. It's reducing suffering.
Right.
And I think that reducing suffering, however horrible emphasizing hedonism is, reducing suffering is a far more destructive and seductive and insidious way to view the world.
It is. It totally is, because that's what gets you antinatalism. That's what gets you the voluntary human extinction movement. That's what gets you, humanity shouldn't exist. Right. No, it's. I mean, but at the same time, though, like negative utilitarianism, which is, isn't that far from hedonism. The obsession of like suffering is inherently bad. Therefore, let's go extinct. It's not too far off from the hedonistic elements. Isn't too far off from that, because it's still placing a moral quality to pain and pleasure.
Right. You mind if I go off on a little rant for a while?
Sure, go for it.
This was a post that will never come out, but it was based on an econ talk where this guy was a utilitarian. He was trying to emphasize negative utilitarianism, minimizing suffering.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna grab a beer real quick.
Okay, cool. Anyways, he wanted to minimize suffering, and then his idea was to raise people to be less selfish and less family oriented, and to want to give away more of their wealth to the rest of the world in order to minimize suffering of the rest of the world. And his example brought up three forms of humanity: Homo utilitas, which is Homo utilitarian, and Homo hedonist, which is Homo, kind of selfishness, or Homo selfishness, which is just focused on the self, sort of like Migi and the Parasites. And the other example was, people as they are now. And the thing about Homo utilitas is that he was like, well, I mean, it's kind of sort of like a bee, like a bee in a colony. But that's not the way I really want to think about it, They're not really unthinking. But if you go through it, if you really were to be indiscriminate in how you treated people and who you gave to,
right.
It's very, very difficult. I mean, First of all, let's just assume you're indiscriminate. But you also have to worry about effort, right? Who's the first person you're going to give to? The person that's nearest to you, right? Who's the person you're going to not like the most? People who are geographically close to you and who it's easier to give to or take care of because they're similar to you. And suddenly, in reducing suffering, you've recreated parochialism and localism and familialism and culture.
Right.
So in order to actually want to give to someone on the other side of the wall, you find you actually have to denigrate your own and create apathy for the person who is closest to you.
Right.
Because unless you actively do that, then simply the center of gravity of them being closer to you, speaking the same language, having something in common with you, being low effort to take care of them, actually knowing how to take care of them, would make you do something similar to what you were already doing.
Right.
And that's sort of the unspoken assumption to telescopic altruism, is that there are a bunch of unspoken assumptions that go into utilitarianism. They're never examined because no one would logically ever do it the way it's described. There's a huge jump from minimize suffering to donating to a child in Africa.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
And, if you look at it as an actual utility function, it's perfectly possible to minimize suffering in a localized setting and still minimize the aggregate suffering by just focusing on an area.
Right.
There's no guarantee that by being telescopically altruistic, you'll actually minimize the aggregate suffering in the utility function. But of course, again, it's a philosophic cover for liberalism or progressivism.
You could also say, like, it sort of is hedonistic in a way because, doing something locally requires much more effort than doing something telescopically. You can just donate to a charity, the money goes, it's off in the ether, but you feel good because you did something right, and it required minimal effort. It kind of gets into the whole aspect of time preference. I didn't want to invest a lot of time in helping people, but there's this convenient way for me to do it, and I've maximized utility. So I have reason to donate to charity rather than help in the local soup kitchen or something, which would require more time, which is more time intensive. Right. And so that kind of makes it much more, and like you said, it's more of a cover for liberalism in that sense.
Right. I think that there's so much of leftism, which is just an intellectual cover for justifying what people are forced to do because of political and social pressure. Someone the other day brought up how to be a famous or important libertarian thinker is to write another complex justification for welfare. I can't tell you how many, mildly left-wing libertarians who are decently good at economics always come back to, and that's why we should expand welfare.
Oh my God. How does that work, though? How are you a libertarian and you want to expand welfare? That makes no sense to... Well, I sort of know this because it's many libertarians, the libertarian movement has been infiltrated by leftists, so they're just trying to make libertarianism more palatable to leftism, basically.
Well, even I can't remember, it was Hayek or Friedman. Shoot, I apologize. Anyways, one of them made a principled argument for universal basic income. And it literally was just a speech they would make to more left-leaning audiences to be able to get into the building.
Right.
And, if you look at their other writing, it basically completely contradicted whatever they would say. They were saying, this is the least worst thing you could do. It's not the best thing you could do. It's the least worst thing you could do. And I think there's a serious strain of academic libertarians who have kind of taken that sort of least worst approach,
right,
and accepted it as, well, that's my job, to advocate the least worst approach.
Right. Well, I mean, they're academics, so I mean,
right.
They have to make they got to get tenure,
right,
somehow, and they can't get tenure by going against what the media, or not media, but the academic establishment says. So
right.
It's hard and feathered.
Right. And I think after a little while, they start to believe their own BS.
Yeah.
But I mean, anyone who went back to the basics of the famous right-wing libertarian speakers could see the problems that would emerge with UBI, etc. Anyways, I don't want to get into that. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not something that I want to advocate for. That was my utilitarian tangent.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good. I'm all for bashing utilitarianism because
which was what? Wasn't that John Stuart Mill?
Yeah,
that was John Stuart Mill.
It's all his idea. Well, actually, no, it was Jeremy Bentham that I think that originally. Well, utilitarianism isn't the first consequentialist moral philosophy, but it was popularized by there have always been since Plato there have been people that have advocated for it was originally probably Epicurus was probably one of the first at least proto-utilitarians, and it was Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill that really popularized it in the 19th century.
I'm sorry, but fuck Mill. Anytime there's something wrong with the world, you can go back and Mill had his hands in it. He may not have been the first. He wasn't the last. He may not have been in the primary cause. But he was there.
Oh yeah, no, he was definitely there. Well, I mean, you know the story behind Mill, right? He was basically raised to be a utilitarian. Jeremy Bentham and his father basically got together and educated him in the most most utilitarian way possible.
And that's why he turned out to be this cuck, right?
Turned out to be the most cucked philosopher in Western culture. Can't remember the exact story, but they actually did do a lot of genetic, not genetic, a lot of utilitarian-esque engineering with him, in terms of his education and stuff, that in order to make a perfect utilitarian human being, I'm not kidding, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill's father actually tried this. They raised him this way.
Is there a book on this, the training of?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's a biography on J.S. Mill that touches on that. But yeah, that is what they did.
I mean, he was even into fag rights before it was cool. He had his hand in everything.
Yeah.
He is the prototypical progressive.
Yeah. No, it is kind of crazy how that works out.
Yeah, I mean, he was the hipster progressive.
He was the hipster progressive. What? No, John Stuart Mill totally was that. Well, what's funny though is John Stuart Mill was also very libertarian in his sensibilities.
Right, and I mean that's where you get into the fact that classical liberalism and communism are kind of the two heads of progressivism.
Right, it's sort of a good cop, bad cop.
Right, and when they both get their way, you end up leaning towards communism. And it's a difficult battle to kind of take the good from the bad and say there are definitely some great economic insights which came out of the 19th and 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
Where you kind of have to surgically remove the philosophy from them to call them valid at all.
Right. Well, yeah, they made some good economic insights, but no, you're right. They still make so many philosophical errors in terms of what is right, how humans operate, and what we consider to be good for society. Still have so much of it is bass backwards.
Right. It really is, and I mean, it's scary that you look at at kind of the intersections, and it's like, Marx read Adam Smith, and he, who else did you read? Shoot.
You read Carlyle.
You read Carlyle as well.
Well,
and it's like
Carlyle.
It's like there are elements of modern thought, or even reactionary thought, which resonated with Marx. Now, I happen to think Marx was one of those people who he listened but he didn't hear, if that makes any sense.
He heard but he didn't listen.
No, isn't the other way around? Isn't it you listen but you do not hear?
Listen but not hear. Maybe, I don't know. It works either. I think it works either way, honestly. But
okay, fine. How about read but did not grok?
Okay, yeah, that works too.
But if he understood Adam Smith's thought, then he wouldn't have been a communist. He'd still be paused, but he wouldn't have been a communist. And if he'd understood Carlyle, then he definitely would have been a communist.
Yeah.
There are elements of either which are superficially communist. And I do think that you need to be incredibly careful with Adam Smith. I think he's an incredibly paused writer, especially philosophically. But I don't think if you were logically honest, you would get from Adam Smith the communist without a lot of twisting.
Yeah, you would have to. Like, I think maybe Marx. I'm not going to pretend that I understand Hegel, because I don't. I tried reading Hegel. I cannot grok Hegel, but I do suspect that the Hegelian dialectic influenced Marx a lot. So that I think maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. Hegel was very obtuse. So I can't pretend to understand Hegel, but I wonder if that had anything to do with it. But
well, and I haven't looked into who influenced Engels, because he's half the picture as well.
Right. Well, no, I mean like Georg Friedrich. I forget his. No, I'm talking about like Hegel, who was the.
No, I know. I meant, but it was Marx and Engels who wrote the manifesto.
Okay.
So it was co-authored work, and I haven't looked into the influences of Engels, so you never know what's coming in there. And I know Hegel was a huge influence in the manifesto. I'm not disputing that at all.
Oh, okay, I got it. I thought you misheard me.
No.
Okay.
I was actually talking about Hegel.
Oh, okay, got it.
All right, I'll be back in a second. So monologue time.
What to talk about now? Well, I guess it just goes to show everybody that I don't know. It's really it's an interesting little, I don't know, I can't monologue. I'm not very good at it. I'm not going to lie.
I agree. I hope I didn't agree to something horrible.
I'm looking over, well, you just agreed that I'm not good at monologuing.
Well, I wouldn't know.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking over my notes. It's like we basically covered everything I wanted to cover. Like we had humanity's meaning, universalism versus particularism, inhumanist environmentalism. There is I was reminded a little bit of Robinson Jeffers. You know who that is?
I skimmed through his Wikipedia page, but no, I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, he was a poet who was basically. I don't know if he coined the term inhumanism, but he basically believed that in order to in order to truly appreciate the environment, you have to humans have to sort of divorce themselves from their selves, like their self-centeredness, in order to truly appreciate the beauty of the world around them. And he believed that as we stand now, we're incapable of doing so. And it's not anti-humanist per se, as like what you get with like the voluntary human extinction movement, but it does kind of play into the non-humanist aspect, like the beauty of the non-human is sort of what you need to sort of have if you're an environmentalist. It's. I do feel like environmentalism sort of requires some degree of detachment from human interests.
And here's where I'm going to completely, I disagree wholeheartedly.
Okay.
And I think this is actually a sort of Aristotelian problem. Mm-hmm. Let's say we have inhuman, antinatalist, anti-humanism on one end, right?
Right.
Real extreme. Right. The other end we have unfettered, human egoism, as it were, right?
Okay, yeah.
Humans are my super group, and nothing outside that super group matters.
Right.
if you look at it, humans feel trapped and depressed in an environment which is too ordered, which is too uniform, which is too plain.
Okay.
There are so many dystopias which are just perfect copies of each other with no differences, right? So the mean between perfect order and absolute inhuman chaos, as is just letting humanity decay, is the garden. The garden has elements of chaos and nature in it, and elements of humanity in a way that neither kills humanity, as in there's nothing inherently dangerous to the garden,
right?
But it doesn't kill nature, as in humans tends to the garden.
The human is it's sort of like the Christian idea that man has dominion over the beasts, and that the idea that humanity should be a good steward to the world.
Right. That's exactly what I was getting at. Is that
like gardening is a form of stewardship.
Right. The Aristotelian mean in environmentalism, as far as I'm concerned, and I could be wrong, is stewardship over the environment.
Right. No, I agree.
And not in a stupid communist.
Right, not in a stupid. Well, I mean, the stupid communist way it leans more towards the inhumanism, I think. Because it's kind of no, I think you're right. Like I think that, but what I'm basically saying is that I don't think that you necessarily need to be a total anti-humanist, pro-human extinction in order to be an environmentalist. But I do think that you need to understand, as a steward of the world, as a human, and as a man who has dominion over the beasts, you need to be able to recognize, much as a king or a hero or a leader, that there are interests that go beyond your own as an individual, or and there are things that that extend beyond yourself, and that goes for environmentalism. I don't think that I think you need that. I think you need to be able to kind of look beyond your own interests and be able to kind of look beyond yourself and just kind of realize that, yeah, I am part of this greater whole, and it is my responsibility as a steward to be the gardener of the earth, to mix metaphors here.
Right, and I think the difference between environmentalism and stewardship is that while environmentalism is saying that to be environmentalist is to be against humanity, a steward sees being a gardener as being part of what it means to be human.
Right.
And being inhuman is either A, not caring about humanity and letting nature kill you, or not caring about nature and just being self-centered.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I see it as very human to be concerned about the garden.
Yeah, no, that's true, because we are just as much a part of the earth as any other animal, but we are the stewards of the garden. So yeah, no. I'm not saying that we need to, in order to be an environmentalist, you need to completely hate humanity. I'm just saying that it's important to kind of, realize what your duties are, and understand, I can't just, dump oil in the, if one of my oil tankers explodes and it pollutes the Gulf of Mexico, I have to understand, I done goofed, and that's not something that a good steward does.
Right.
So there is a mean between the two extremes, between the pro, anti-environment, polluting the world, versus annihilate all humans that exist. There is a those are two extremes that are, that are degenerate, that are immoral, and we should not advocate them.
Right.
So, and that kind of plays into the I guess you could call that the conservationist idea. Is there is a beauty to nature, and we are the stewards of the earth, and we need to preserve it for future generations.
So, and I just want to emphasize that I've said this before, but nature is dangerous when it's not cared for and harnessed.
Right.
It can kill us. Right,
exactly. It's you really do have a responsibility to make nature better, to make more habitable, because it actually is it really isn't very habitable. It's a miracle that we're even on this planet at all.
Right.
That we can make the Earth livable.
And it's a miracle that we weren't eaten by large predators, or flooded by the ocean, or torn apart by tornadoes or the cold or any of the other things that are out there that could kill us.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I mean, as much as Reiko Tamura feels vulnerable in human society, humans feel much more naked when they're out in raw nature.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're in an environment where everything is out to get you, and you don't have much of and your chance of survival is relatively low.
Right. I mean, you have to be incredibly well trained and experienced to be able to survive on your own out in raw nature.
Right, and there's actually, so this kind of gets into another thing that I thought was very interesting in Parasyte, where at the very end, and this, when I first watched this pissed me off to no end, was when so at the end of the series, Shinichi has lost Migi the Parasyte, and so he's missing his right arm, and so when he faces off with Goto, he manages to stab him with this, I don't know what it actually, like a piece of metal that he found in a scrap pile, in a pile of garbage.
It was a pipe.
Yeah, it was a pipe. Yeah, you're right. It was like
a sharpened pipe, but
yeah, it was like a sharpened pipe that he found, and he managed to stab him with it. He didn't kill him instantly, but it
poisoned him.
He managed to poison him, and somehow, I forget how, but Migi manages to grow back and protect him from this killing blow. And then later they learn that there was this poison that goes into Goto's system that causes all the parasites attached to him to want to flee from his body. And so that's how they kill him. They sort of throw a monkey wrench in the whole system of him being this invincible monster. They just throw a monkey wrench in the whole system, and he becomes completely vulnerable. And then Shinichi thinks it's not my, but Migi, so Goto is trying to reassemble himself, he's dying, and he has and Migi says that he has a 50-50 shot at surviving, and Shinichi decides I should let nature solve this problem, because it's not my place. It's the place of the Earth should make this decision. And then as he's walking away to kind of let nature decide, and this pissed me off to no end, because I thought dude, just kill him already, because this has gone on long enough, and this guy wants to kill humanity. The answer is obviously fucking kill this guy, but he didn't instantly. But Migi says to him I never cared for people who say that the Earth has that it's what the Earth wants, or that the Earth has interest, because the Earth doesn't care. That the Earth is an inanimate object. It's just a planet. It doesn't care about what is on it. And then Shinichi thinks about it and says, that's interesting. And then he goes back and kills Goto, or whatever his name is. So I thought that was very interesting, because people often invoke, especially environmentalists do this, they invoke the Earth as if it's something that's conscious. And that kind of goes against the notion of being a steward.
Of an atheist.
Of an atheist too. I was saying of a steward, of somebody who cares for the Earth and tends it, and is the gardener. But it actually does go against the atheist notion, because
I mean, when you're a steward or something, you don't give it agency, right?
Right. But
even if it does have limited agency, I'm not saying Earth does, but you have a child, they have limited agency. But part of being a steward of a child is kind of, to a certain extent, ignoring their own agency and saying, I know what's best in most situations, and letting their agency only in situations where they have a handle on things. And at the same time, I think there is this danger of anthropomorphism, right? That we anthropomorphize things. We see faces in the mist and intentions in the earth. And I think when people look at non, they miss the point. Non is, yes, it's an anthropomorphization
of nature.
Right. But at the same time, by drawing on the Cthulhu mythology, the blind idiot god sort of element.
It's like people misunderstand non. Like non is not a conscious thing.
Right. It's not conscious. It doesn't.
It isn't.
Act.
It's not a literal god, and it does not act. It is simply
the apathy of nature to your existence.
Right. And I think people read a little too much into it.
Right. And it's the apathy that you have to understand. The inconsciousness, the blindness, the inability or unwillingness to change what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that sits there and is unaware that you even exist.
Right.
While processes destroy you. That's the element that is apparent in the earth, is that the earth doesn't think, it doesn't act. But if you're going to put a face on it, it's going to be something that doesn't care that you exist.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And right. What were you saying?
I was just saying that the purpose of the Lovecraftian mythology is not to anthropomorphize the dead universe, but to put a face on the universe just so we can understand how much it doesn't care about us.
Right. Yeah. And so then, in that case, that makes a case for stewardship.
Right.
Because the Earth. I mean, the Earth will care for itself, but what the Earth does isn't necessarily good for humanity, and it isn't good for a lot of other life on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So being a steward is basically exerting your authority over nature and letting nature run its course when appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And only when appropriate.
And only when appropriate, right. And so like Shinichi when Migi tells him that the Earth is indifferent, that the Earth doesn't care, then Shinichi sort of realizes like it's okay that I kill this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because it actually is my place to be the judge and to kill this thing that will probably most likely be a huge threat to humanity.
Right. It's kind of like, and I hate to bring this analogy, but at the same time, it's kind of like an atheist who's living their life and they believe in something without realizing that they're acting as if there is some sort of agent in the world. And when they finally realize, oh shit, there's no agent, then they actually act as if there's no agent in the world.
Right. But when you act that there's no agent in the world, then
you have to be the judge.
You have to be the judge, right?
To be the judge of your own actions.
Mm-hmm.
If you're letting some other system run you, then you believe that there's some other agency that has a choice, that has made that choice for you about the way the world should look.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the emphasis. I mean, one of my teachers emphasize this, is that morality, true universal morality, not just universalized morality, but if you believe that there's any truth or morality inherent in the universe, you must believe in something greater than the universe itself, something that is metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
If you can universalize morality in a utilitarian sense, but to have a universal morality, there has to be something metaphysical in the universe, because there's nothing inherent in the universe which values humanity or any human action over the other without metaphysics.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense to me, because you look at nature, there is no, because if you look at the Earth divorced from Christianity, divorce it from any metaphysical notion, then you get blank, indifferent nature.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly, and I think that's why when we look at the way most progressive secular religions, secular actors act, they act as if there's a God.
Mm-hmm.
They may have screwed up beliefs about God.
Right.
They don't act as if there's not a God.
Mm-hmm. Right. No one acts as if there is no God. I think that everyone I think it goes without saying, everyone implicitly believes there is a God.
In their actions, not necessarily in their heads, right?
You are right. They won't ever admit it, but that is sort of the mentality that they have, regardless.
And whether they worship some sort of ideal version of humanity or their own existence,
mm-hmm.
they have a wish, a prayer for tomorrow, for there to be tomorrow.
Right.
That they have that their life has value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they'll attach whatever they can to that. Like they'll attach meaning to just about anything that they possibly can.
And who was the inhumanist guy?
It was Robinson Jeffers.
And I don't think he's right about environmentalism. I think he's right about maybe communist atheism, as it were. You have to be an inhumanist to appreciate the communism and the apathy of the world.
Yeah.
And I don't think, maybe there's people who can do that. But they're very few in number, and I certainly haven't met them.
There might have been a time when I tried that, but couldn't ultimately.
it's you know.
I had an antinatalist phase.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that. Like I had that phase, and I went through the anti-humanism and everything, and now I can't do it. It's too much. I gazed into the abyss too long. And just can't do it.
And what's the phrase? And then the abyss stared back.
Yeah, if you battle not with monsters, lest you become a monster yourself. And if you gaze into an abyss, the abyss gazes also into you.
Well, that's the secondary or tertiary part of that is that if you stare into nothing, your mind forces you to see something at some point.
Mm-hmm, right.
You can never see nothing. Your mind has to project agency or somethingness into the world, or else you go crazy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think that's very telling about the way humanity sees itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sorry, I'm like running on limited sleep at the moment. But
no. It reminds me. I mean, sorry to tie back to the show. I think that's why humans value social creatures. Is that for a creature to be totally egoist, to be wholly concerned with only its self-survival to the point where it cannot cooperate, seems to go against everything that humans implicitly in their actions value.
Mm-hmm.
They value having some sort of greater agent which directs actions with greater values. Right. And it's abhorrent to see someone who is wholly subservient to their own self-nature. And I think that's why a lot of left-leaning people attack, libertarians and objectivists and rightists, because whether they grok them or not, they see them as the same sort of egotistical, self-serving, psychopathic creatures that Nikki or the Parasytes are. And I don't think that's a fair assessment, but at the same time, it's that fear of the psychopath, the fear of the person who doesn't care about your existence.
Well, I think it also boils down to the fear of, I don't know, I think that people have a sort of fear of agency to the point where and I think this is a tendency of liberals as well, especially when you get into like R and K solution and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
People have a fear of individuality, and they have a fear of they have a fear of great men.
Mm-hmm.
They because great men are. See, what's ironic about Ayn Rand, and what's ironic about objectivism, is that they are very close to Carlyle, in the sense that they have this like libertarian notion. They have a very libertarian notion of like great men and people who are like the captains of industry, and they're the ones who are the strong, rugged individualists, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then like it goes against their notions of fairness. It goes against their notions of equality, like, and that's like the main thing. But it also, the very notion of someone with agency goes against everything that they stand for about equality, because someone with agency and someone with that degree of liberty can wield authority.
Right.
That's what they're afraid of, is authoritarianism.
And Mulbug states this, bureaucracy is extremely jealous of personal authority, of anything that smells of personal authority.
Right.
And within the heart of every leftist is a bureaucrat.
Right. Yeah. And what's great though, what I think we really touched on in this discussion was the idea of stewardship, sort of in order to be a proper environmentalist, quote unquote, I think, is when we're talking about stewardship requires authoritarianism in part, and the wisdom of when to let nature run its course. So in general, I think what the takeaway should be that when we're talking about stewardship, when we're talking about the environment, I think that that is the proper, that a sort of Carlylean mentality is the proper mentality about the environment. And this might inform, I haven't read Thoreau recently, but like Thoreau was actually influenced by Carlyle, and now I kind of wonder, like, was this what Thoreau was thinking? But I don't know, I'm kind of talking out of my ass at the moment. But.
That's fair enough. While we're good and both tired and drunk, or inebriated at the very least.
I am. I know for a fact that I am.
Okay.
On the next episode, one irradiated Watson takes the black pill.
You're going to have to explain the black pill to me, because I actually have been missing that whole meme life.
You don't know the black pill?
No, I've been very good in trying to be productive, and unfortunately I missed out on that meme magic.
This is hilarious though. The black pill is basically so it's a TRS thing where, so like Seventh Son just like plays like this black metal riff in the middle of the podcast, and he just kind of talks about things like your whole, like, everything about, like, even though you're like, so you know how like you take the red pill and you realize like, oh, all these ugly truths and stuff, and the black pill is basically like, yeah, you've learned all these things, but it ultimately doesn't matter because you're going to lose in the end. You know, you've learned all these truths, but it doesn't matter in the end because the left is still going to win because whatever, like whatever reason you could come up with. I actually had one. So like the formula. So all right, you want to hear mine? I had one. So you think that it's like, all right, so you want to, so you have hold out for Poland, right? You know, they're like, oh, we're gonna like block their, so Poland's gonna block off the refugees, right? And you're thinking to yourself, oh yeah, I could go to Poland. I could find a nice traditional wife and have kids with her. Just remember, Rush V probably fucked her first. And if recent findings of telegony are any indication that even if he didn't get her pregnant, you're going to have, like, your kids with that woman are probably going to look like little kebabs regardless. No matter what you do, you were cucked before you reached first base.
Anything else you want to shitpost about, or just wrap up for our own sake before we outro?
I think, you know, the answer to everything is Carlyle. It's all there in Shooting Niagara or whatever.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, it's been a wonderful evening.
It certainly has. We learned that the answer to environmentalism is authoritarianism, and
of course,
is and has always been that. But until next time, I'm Count Nothing Face.
And this has been a presentation of Caligula's Council. Nice.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you listen again soon.
All right. Signing off as one irradiated Watson.
And Count Nothing.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night, or evening, or morning, or afternoon. Whenever you're listening to this, have a good one.
End scene.
End scene.